After careful consideration and review of the current crime situation in St. James, His Excellency the Governor General has declared a state of public emergency in the entire parish of St. James. I advised the Governor General to make the declaration on the recommendation of the Chief of Defense Staff and the Commissioner of Police. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the assessment of the security forces that the situation in St. James merits this response and the use of emergency, powers. I'm sure that that is not in debate. Yesterday, the Parliament rose in unison to condemn the barbaric murder of innocent lives, young children who had their entire future ahead of them. And for all parents, it must be a consideration in your mind that it could have been your children. And so we take this moment as we declare our response to grieve with the families and to encircle them and surround them with our prayers for comfort at this time. But we also give resolute assurance to the people of Jamaica that we will not wilt, we will not resile in the face of terror.
So this morning we learned that there's a state of emergency declared for the entire parish of St. James. You know, this is a strategy that the government has been relying on for the last 5 years. We don't think it's a valid strategy. That's why we're testing it in court. We understand the need to respond very strongly to what happened in Salt Spring community, and I want to extend condolences to the parents and family of the 2 young boys who were killed in that awful incident. You know, we heard Heroy Clark yesterday in Parliament call for a Zozo in the community. Now, the zones of special operations are something that we support, you know, in appropriate cases, and we feel that that would be the right mechanism to deploy here. The states of emergency, as you know, we do not think that they can be validly used as a policing tool. And they haven't worked because the crime problem in the country continues. What we need is social interventions to redirect youth at risk away from crime, and we need serious strategies for law enforcement to ensure that hardened criminals, violence producers are effectively addressed and cases are built that can hold them accountable and ultimately put them behind bars for long periods of time. And we're committed to that balanced strategy.
I am not here this morning to stir up the nation into vengeance. But I think this country needs to stop sending mixed signals to criminals. They are not going to return any grace you give them. They are not reasonable people. They are terrorists, and they must be treated as such. What occurred is an act of terror. What is terror? It's a well-defined concept in law. It was clearly the intent to send a chilling signal. No matter where you are, who you are, or whether you're in public, or whether innocent people are around, they are going to kill you. And they will use any means to do it. We have been proposing to Parliament the increase in penalties for various crimes. And there has emerged a narrative which I believe is a naive narrative. It assumes a luxury that does not exist. Comparatively, our scheme of penalties for these crimes and these acts of terror is very light compared to other countries that we wish to compare ourselves to or aspire to be. So, we have passed the new Bail Act, which does give new powers to deal with this challenge, particularly in controlling criminals who have come into the legal and justice system. We passed a new firearms bill, new Firearms Act. There has been some lack of clarity in its applications. The DPP has written to the relevant minister, I believe it would be the Minister of National Security, suggesting certain amendments. We have always felt that the penalties should be higher. But of course, there is this strong narrative that we should give protection to criminals. The penalties should be much higher than they are for the possession of illegal weapons. And so we will amend the legislation to remove any ambiguity or lack of clarity. My own view on the penalty for murder has evolved. I was never a supporter of the death penalty. But the more I study this matter and begin to understand the minds of the criminals, there are no souls there. They have no heart. They need to be removed from among us. But I'm not here to get into a debate about the jurisprudence on this matter. But within the limits of that jurisprudence, I believe the highest penalty possible should be applied. And currently, the penalties now are not a deterrent.
I don't think you can just look at murder in isolation, because mandatory minimum sentences are being imposed now on firearm offences as well. And the volume of firearm offences is significant. So between that and murder's always had mandatory minimum sentences in it. What they're doing is increasing those minimums from 15 years and 20 years, which is what exists now for non-capital murder. And I think they're proposing 40 and 50 years. And when you add to that the mandatory minimum sentence for firearms offences, what you're going to have is a growing prison population, because people will be in prison for much longer. So whereas the average duration of a prisoner in Jamaica is approximately, across all offences from minor to major, is I believe in the region of 3 years, that is going to be a much higher number going forward. How are they all going to fit? Where are the rehabilitation programs to try and reorient those people who have committed crimes so that when they come back into society, they're no longer a threat to the rest of us? The consequences of these measures need to be thought through and implemented, you know. So I don't hear the government talking about these things. Yes, we all understand the need to be firm when it comes to dealing with serious criminal offences, and we're in favour of that. But we need to also think through the impact and implications of changing the rules in this way. For example, the backlog in the criminal justice system, which has been cleared as a result of reforms that I implemented as Minister of Justice to encourage guilty persons to plead guilty and get a discount so that they get out of the court system and into the prison system much quicker. With the new mandatory minimum sentences, that is now a spoke in the wheel. So you're going to have many more cases that would have been dealt with through a guilty plea, now going to trial in the gun court and so on. The court system is going to be overwhelmed by that. So these are some of the things that need to be thought through before you start talking about the increased sentencing rules, you know. I just think you need to have a holistic approach when you're dealing with the criminal justice problem. And it's not just on the back end, which is the courts and the prison system, but it's on why is it that we have so many young people going into criminal activity? What's happening in the early childhood and primary schools that result in children matriculating to secondary, they're not ready for it, they can't handle the secondary curriculum, they leave with nothing to show for it. And those are the ones that are vulnerable to being swayed into crime. We need to have an overall strategy that deals with both sides of the problem. And this government really doesn't understand that.
And there is an argument being put forward that somehow, if we increase the penalties, we will have overcrowding in our prisons, or people will not plead guilty and seek to use weaknesses in cases and our security forces to beat the charge, and that somehow there will be a backlog in our courts. There is validity in all of the arguments put forward. But I think those people who carry those arguments should be aware that Jamaica's incarceration rate is the lowest in the region. For a country that has so much crime, our incarceration rates are amongst the lowest. Could there be a correlation there? It needs to be studied. Now is the time for the nation to speak in one clear voice to the soulless, heartless criminals amongst us. We are going to remove you from our community.